A third Pentagon official is stepping down ever since President Trump announced he plans to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Rear Admiral Kevin Sweeney stepped down as Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense over the weekend. It does come just as Pentagon spokeswoman Dana White stepped down following the resignation of Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis. But now those plans to withdraw troops from Syria are hitting a snag. National Security Advisor John Bolton is reassuring U.S. allies that troops won't leave without a number of conditions.
We're going to be discussing the President's decision to withdraw, but to do so from northeast Syria in a way that makes sure that ISIS is defeated and is not able to revive itself and become a threat again, and to make sure that the defense of Israel and our other friends in the region is absolutely assured, and to take care of those who have fought with us against ISIS and other terrorist groups.
Bolton will now head to Turkey to discuss the president's plan, where tension remains over the U.S.-backed Kurds in Syria. To discuss where policy in Syria is headed, we talked to former senator and former governor of Rhode Island, Lincoln Chafee. Thanks for joining us, Governor.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so President Trump said in December the U.S. would pull troops out of Syria because ISIS had been defeated. We heard him, and that was the only reason why we were there. Now we are getting this mixed message with National Security Advisor John Bolton saying there will not be a full withdrawal until Islamic State militants are defeated. What do you make of these different positions that are coming out of this administration?
Well, don't forget, we got involved in the Middle East militarily after September 11th of 2001, went into Afghanistan in October of 2001, and then invaded Iraq in March of 2003. So this is 17 years of this quagmire, and I personally have to agree somewhat with President Trump. It's time to get out. And whatever that timetable is, let's get out. It's not working. And I know it's complicated with the Kurds and the Turks and all these issues and ISIS, but I agree, and I don't agree very much with President Trump on most issues, but on this one, after 17 and 18 years, let's get out of the Middle East and let the people there decide for their own future.
Well, it's interesting that you would point that out because you're talking about John Bolton's now going to Turkey to discuss the president's agenda, yet it seems like everything Bolton's saying is opposite or against what the president said he was initially going to do. So who should we be trusting right now, and ultimately who is going to win? Do you really feel like we will be able to withdraw troops from Syria, as the president pointed out, in the near future?
Well, the Trump administration is known for its zigzagging, and this is no exception. Here we go again. The president tweets in December one thing, and now his national security advisor is saying something completely different. We're going to be there for a long time. So let's see how it resolves. These are complicated issues. We're up in the northeastern part of Syria, which is on the Turkish border, on the Iraqi border. And so all these issues of what we do with the Kurds and ISIS are important to be resolved. But also I'll note that I was in the Senate when we approved the authorization to use military force right after September 11th, 2 days after September 11th. And that same authorization is now being used for all these conflicts. That's the legal justification for us being in Syria to begin with. And that's an outdated authorization approved by the Senate and the House of Representatives just days after September 11th to respond to that particular event, not to be stuck for years and years, 17, 18 years now in the Middle East. So either have Congress debate our presence there militarily or just get out.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the point that you were there 17 years ago, and you remember the presentation they gave to you that allowed you to have this vote to go in there in the first place. Do you feel at any point that they did not tell you the full truth, or that they should have presented to you some sort of benchmarks that would have said, we're not going to be here for 17 years later? Should that be something, maybe looking at future involvement that the U.S. gets into, that they make sure is a part of the plans presented to Congress?
Yes, and the whole idea of having Congress debate, because constitutionally it is Congress's role to declare war, was after Vietnam. In my year of 1973, they passed the War Powers Act to make sure that Congress was involved in any kind of conflict going forward, because it wasn't other than the Gulf of Tonkin resolution on Vietnam, and that cost over 50,000 American lives. And so the thinking was for the 1973 War Powers Act, that's not going to happen again. And here it is happening again, tragically, by using this old authorization for military force that we passed 2 days after September 11th to respond, had no idea we were going to be using this in Yemen and Syria. Congress should be debating this. They should be involved in making these decisions, and they're not.
Well, a part of that debate would be the role that the U.S. still has to play in Syria. Can you see anything from both being an inside as well as now on the outside looking in? Is there any role left that America should be playing in this theater?
That is the question. And I, for one, say no. I don't see any national interest. And I believe that we're even making the local people hate us more with our presence, our bombing of hospitals and drone strikes and weddings getting bombed, all by mistake, but nonetheless, this is what's happening. And if you want people to like us around the world and respect us and admire us, this isn't the way to do it. It's time to get out and let them resolve it as they best see fit. In my view, and this is one area I agree with President Trump.
Well, conservatives and those on the left together are united. A lot of people are calling this out, especially the fact that the president seems, or John Bolton's policy seems to be going back on the president's withdrawal in Syria. Blame it a lot on the control that the industrial military complex has here in D.C. You were in the Senate. How much power do those that get financial backings or have financial interest in Syria actually play sometimes in these decisions? Not necessarily maybe in what made your decision, but more importantly, what you've seen them influence in other decisions across the world.
Well, that's the famous Eisenhower warning after he left office to beware of the military-industrial complex. I believe it is powerful, to answer your question. And there was a resolution put forward in the Congress just recently by Senator Sanders and Senator Lee, a Republican from Utah, to say, no, we cannot going to use this old authorization to use military force left over from 2001 for all these military adventures around the world. We're going to have debates, as the 1973 War Powers Act mandated we have. And that lost the first time around. Couldn't get the votes. Just common sense. You want Congress to be debating whether our young people are being sent over there to die, and is it in our national best interest? And that resolution died. So you might argue that the military-industrial complex still is as powerful as Eisenhower predicted it would be back in 1961.
That's interesting that a bill that was put together both by the two extremes, from Senator Sanders, Senator Lee, could not find enough to get voted on. I find that to be that just shows right now where the power is being played within our Congress. So meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is also going on a trip to the Middle East this week with stops in Jordan. What do you think is going to be his influence in involving stops in Egypt, Bahrain, Qatar, everything else? How is this going to actually involve our Middle East policy going forward, along with John Bolton's trip to Turkey?
Well, I served in the Foreign Relations Committee, and I was chair of the Middle East subcommittee, and I always thought it was valuable to travel to the different regions, to the different countries, and hear firsthand. I like listening to the people that are there and our people in our embassy, not only the Jordanians or the Kuwaitis or the Bahrainis or the Egyptians, but also the people in our embassies that are there every day. And so hopefully Secretary of State Pompeo can learn from this experience. I did. I thought it was hugely valuable to get into the region, to get to Afghanistan, to get to Iraq, to get to Israel, to get to Jordan, and listen to both sides, our embassy and all the people that are working there, and of course the local people that are so important to making good decisions.
So is it unrealistic to ever think or expect the Middle East to actually be able to handle their own affairs without U.S. interference?
Well, of course, when I served on the Foreign Relations Committee, I asked Paul Wolfowitz at one of his presentations before our committee on the Foreign Relations Committee, after the invasion of Iraq, how we've thrown a rock into the Middle East, the pool that is the Middle East, and there are going to be ripples coming out of this rock we've thrown into this pool. What do you see these ripples? And the first thing that came out of his mouth was, I see a chance to have the Israeli-Palestinian peace. That he lumped that in with how we deal in the Middle East and some of the ramifications of what we can accomplish there. And of course, that never happens. Worse than ever, the prospects of Israeli-Palestinian peace. But I still think, for American interests, that we should work for that two-state solution. I've always advocated for that, and that should be part of how we look at any kind of resolution of all these conflicts that are going on in the Middle East. That's got to be part of it.
Well, Senator Chafee, thank you for giving us your insight, and I think this is one of those stories that are going to continue, and I know I won't feel better until they're actually back on domestic soil myself. Thanks for joining us.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.